I'm Colby, 39, and I run a restaurant just off Main Street in Asheville. At my parents' anniversary dinner, my sister laughed and said, "Can you even afford to eat here?" They didn't know I designed every dish on the table. Down to the mousse they didn't touch. Then the waiter turned to me and said, "Your table is ready, Chef Marchand." And suddenly the silence had weight. If that ever hits somewhere quiet in you, tell me where you're listening from tonight. I was smoothing the edge of a lemon tart when my phone buzzed twice on the prep counter. The text light pulsed against the stainless steel like it had something urgent to say. I wiped my hands on my apron and leaned closer. Clarice, my sister. The name blinked back at me like a dare. She hadn't texted me in 3 years, not even a forwarded meme or one of those chain Happy Thanksgiving messages people send without looking at the names. 3 years of silence, and suddenly she was on my screen again. I tapped it open. Clarice. Family dinner. 40th anniversary. Saturday night at Maison. Just that. No greeting. No hope you're well. No acknowledgement that Maison was mine. The kitchen around me hummed in its usual end-of-day rhythm. The scent of burnt sugar and lavender still hung in the air from our latest test batch. I could hear Renee finishing her close-out checklist near the sink. Zoe was organizing Ray Meekins by size, which I appreciated more than I ever told her. My kitchen, steady, clean, mine, was holding its breath the way it always did when a piece of my past came knocking. Isaac popped his head through the doorway, wiping his hands on a white towel. "That your sister?" he asked without looking. Did they finally figure it out? I locked my phone screen and tucked it face down beside the tart. Not even close. He raised an eyebrow but didn't push. That was Isaac's way. Steady hands and fewer questions than most people, which made him invaluable. He'd been with me since opening night, when we had 6 reservations and 2 broken burners. He knew better than to talk too much when I went quiet. The lemon tart in front of me looked perfect. Too perfect. I took the back of a spoon and softened the edge just slightly, breaking the symmetry. It was a habit, a tiny rebellion. When everything else in life had to be precise, I liked one thing to be just a little off. Human. I picked up the phone again and tapped on the attached PDF. An elegant digital invitation loaded. Cursive script, muted tones, expensive design. You are cordially invited to the 40th wedding anniversary of Harlan and Lenora Marchand. Date, time, venue, RSVP details. At the bottom, guest list. I scanned the names. Clarice and Tyler, Gavin and Sabrina, some extended relatives. And then, Colby. No title, no chef, no owner, not even a last name. Just Colby. Like an afterthought. Like someone remembered me at the last minute and texted it in while holding a glass of wine. I set the phone down and leaned against the edge of the marble island. The kind of quiet ache doesn't shout. It just settles behind your ribs, slow and familiar. You stop hoping for the validation a long time ago. But somehow, there's still a part of you that keeps showing up at the gate, waiting for someone to wave you in. I didn't want their praise. Not anymore. I'd built this restaurant without them. From scorched palms and 18-hour shifts and recipe scraps I kept in a box labeled, "Don't Show Mom." But still, when you grow up always being the difficult child, the artistic one, the one who will probably figure it out, even silence from them has a volume. I looked around the kitchen. Every tile, every steel surface, every custom-built drawer in this space, I had picked out myself. This place was mine in the same way my name had never really been theirs. And yet, here they were, about to walk through my front door. I turned to Isaac. "Confirm the reservation?" He didn't blink, just nodded and scribbled something in the maitre d' log. "They'll be here Saturday night," I added. "They'll dine at my restaurant, and I won't tell them it's mine." He paused. "You sure about that?" "Let them taste it before they try to own it." He smiled the way people smile when they know it's not their business to comment. But just before heading out, he paused again and tapped the end of his pen to the order board. "What should we serve for dessert?" I stared at the prep list a long second. Then, "Put the lemon mousse back on." Isaac's brow lifted slightly. "The one with the burnt sugar rim?" "The one I wrote when I was 17, I said. "Let's see if she remembers." He nodded and disappeared back toward the floor. I stayed still. The air in the kitchen felt heavier, the way it does before a summer storm, charged, but quiet. I walked over to the cooler, opened it, and took out the old recipe card. The handwriting was smudged in places, but the first line was still legible. "Lemon mousse? Use zest, not juice. Bitterness is the point." Back then, my mother had taken one bite and said it was too harsh. "Too bitter for polite company," she'd called it. And maybe she was right. But that's what made it mine. When I stepped into the front dining room of Maison, the room didn't hush. But I did. It was the same room I had spent months designing, down to the millimeter of table spacing and the exact wattage of the custom chandeliers above. Linen gray walls, framed art from local black mountain painters, reclaimed walnut tables, polished every morning by hand. No pretension, just precision. And there they were. Center table, of course. Dead center, framed like a family portrait, minus the warmth. My parents at either end, Clarice angled perfectly for the camera she'd probably set on timer, Gavin scrolling half attentively through his phone, and Sabrina, his wife, smiling the way polite people do when they've run out of anything real to say. Clarice saw me first. She stood, heels clicking softly on the hardwood, and gave me a half-hug that felt like brushing against a mannequin in a department store. "You clean up well," she said, voice honeyed with condescension. "Didn't know chefs wore suits." "I didn't know lawyers wore so much perfume," I replied lightly. She laughed too quickly and smoothed her dress as she sat. Lenora barely stood. Her gaze did a full scan, shoes, pants, collar, then face, calculating the cost of each without moving her lips. "We started without you," she said, sipping something dry. "But you're here now. That's something." I glanced at my watch. "It's exactly 7:30. Harlan looked up. His eyes, always more skeptical than warm, landed on me like I was the misplaced fork in a fine setting. "Punctuality's a good trait," he said. "Finally." I didn't sit right away. I took a moment to look at the table. The stemware was correct, the napkins folded into the signature Maison triangle. But there, just under Clarice's elbow, was a small stitched monogram. M-A-L, Maison à l'Est. My initials, my hands, and not one of them saw it. I sat at the only seat left, wedged between Gavin and an empty chair where a +1 might have gone, if I'd had one. Sabrina offered a polite smile. She looked vaguely embarrassed for me. I couldn't tell if it was because I was alone or because they all thought I'd begged to be invited. "So, how's the restaurant life?" she asked. "Busy," I said. "Rewarding." Gavin didn't look up. "You still doing that catering stuff?" I nodded. "Something like that." Dinner service moved around us like a quiet tide. Plates placed gently, wine poured with practiced grace. None of them noticed how seamless it was. None of them realized they were the centerpiece of a dance I choreographed. The server, Jessica, one of my best, arrived with the champagne. She caught my eye briefly, awaiting signal. I gave her a small nod. "To celebrate," Lenora said, raising her glass. 40 years of marriage, and somehow all 3 of our children seated together without a food fight. Clarice giggled. Gavin grunted. I raised my glass out of rhythm. Harlan stood. He always did this, made a speech. No matter the occasion, he needed to stamp it with his approval. "To 40 years, he said, lifting his glass a bit higher. "To this extraordinary woman who's kept me balanced. To Clarice, our brilliant lawyer. To Gavin, our steady hand in finance. And to Colby." He paused just enough for the room to feel it. Still finding his path. It wasn't cruel. It was worse. It was casual. As if that was my most defining trait, still finding. As if I were a GPS signal flickering on the side of some forgotten highway. I didn't flinch. My face didn't move. But inside I was 13 again, holding a tray of sugar cookies I'd baked myself. I'd arranged them in the shape of the word happy for my dad's birthday. He took one look and said, "Cute," before turning to compliment the shrimp cocktail someone's assistant had brought from the caterer. I sipped the champagne. Brut. Room temperature. They hadn't asked for the house pairing. Of course they hadn't. Across the room, I noticed Isaac watching discreetly from the bar. His eyes met mine just long enough for me to know he was ready if I needed out. I didn't. Yet. The clink of forks and the soft scratch of linen filled the space between us. Gavin finally looked up from his phone and muttered, "This place is nicer than I expected." I looked around. Some people work hard at that sort of thing. Clarice leaned in slightly, a conspiratorial tilt to her tone. "So," she said, lowering her voice to a whisper, "what do you do these days, really?" She smiled like it was a genuine question, but we both knew it wasn't. The amuse-bouche arrived, compressed watermelon with black garlic, a perfect sphere, no, larger than a coin, balanced delicately on a porcelain spoon. It was the kind of dish that whispered, not shouted. Small, yes, but heavy in meaning. Jessica placed each one down with precision, moving clockwise around the table. Her hands steady, eyes scanning subtly, not the food, but the faces. When she reached me last, her glance held half a second longer. A question hung between us. "Are you sure about this?" I nodded once. Slow. She moved on. There was a brief pause at the table, the kind that happens when something unfamiliar touches a plate. Clarice cocked her head. Gavin stared like he wasn't sure whether to eat it or ask it questions. Tyler looked vaguely offended, like the spoon had done something personal to him. Lenora was the first to speak. She tasted with the tip of her tongue, lips pursed. "Interesting," she murmured. "Reminds me of that thing Colby used to make when he was into food." The way she said into food, like it was a passing phase, a midlife hobby, like model trains or weekend yoga. Clarice smiled without looking at me. "Still is, I think, sort of." I didn't answer. My fingers rested lightly on the edge of my spoon, unmoving. I watched them eat. Tyler popped the amuse-bouche in his mouth whole and chewed with exaggerated flair. "Must be tough," he said mid-chew, living off kitchen wages. Sabrina gave a soft, half apology, half embarrassment. Gavin didn't look up from his water. Jessica returned silently to remove the empty spoons. Clarice's, I noticed, was untouched. She reached out, pushed it slightly to the side. "I don't eat fermented anything," she said flatly. That's for foodies who pretend they're poor. The words hit in the same way the kitchen heat used to after midnight, sudden and total. I kept my face still. I'd had years of practice. The others chuckled lightly, not maliciously. Just the kind of laugh people give when they don't know the room's temperature. Tyler smirked and leaned back in his chair, clearly satisfied with his delivery. His cufflinks caught the light, and I wondered briefly if he chose them to sparkle every time he moved. I thought of the first time I'd made black garlic, from scratch, not store-bought. 60 days in a rice cooker I borrowed from an old roommate. My apartment smelled like caramel and vinegar for a month. Clarice had come by once during that time. She walked in, sniffed, and said, "Something die in here." That was 12 years ago. She hadn't changed much. Every word tonight was another lemon squeezed into the same cut. Still playing chef, still not enough. I glanced around the room. No one noticed the floral notes layered under the garlic, or the delicate way the watermelon had been compressed just enough to mimic the texture of raw tuna. That spoon carried weeks of experimentation, years of theory, and half my soul. They saw garnish. But I said nothing, because sometimes silence is the only plate strong enough to carry the truth. Jessica returned, setting down the first course. She didn't look at me, but her motion was sharp. I saw it in the flick of her wrist, the way she aligned each plate with a precision born of pride. The dish, roasted golden beet with whipped feta, a swipe of citrus ash across the porcelain, my spin on a southern salad. Clarice tilted her head again. "Oh, pretty." That word again. Pretty. The same thing my mother called a summer drawing I once brought home. Pretty, but it doesn't mean anything. I watched as Sabrina cut her beet in half and took a small bite. Her eyes widened slightly. She didn't say a word, but she didn't need to. Clarice picked up her fork and simply moved the beets around the plate like puzzle pieces. She didn't eat. She didn't ask. "Is this your regular menu?" Gavin asked, finally making eye contact. "Something like that," I replied. He nodded and then, almost too casually, added, "This place is expensive. I wonder who can actually afford to eat here weekly." No one replied, not even Sabrina. That's the thing about rich people pretending not to talk about money. They're always talking about money. I turned back to my plate, tasting the feta to center myself. Behind me, I heard the soft shuffle of Jessica's shoes retreating into the kitchen. She had paused for just a moment, hesitated, and then moved on without a word. Loyalty doesn't need instructions. I reached for my wine and took a slow sip. Sauvignon Blanc, crisp, paired perfectly with the citrus ash. No one asked what it was. They never did. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Clarice's untouched amuse-bouche being cleared away, still perfectly balanced on its spoon. Just like me, perfectly still, perfectly silent. The duck arrived, perfectly seared, flesh pink at the center, edges crisp, finished with a deep cherry gas streak that shimmered under the low dining lights. I'd worked that reduction for weeks, tuning acidity and depth until it hit like memory wrapped in smoke. Clarice rolled her eyes before even tasting it. That was the first spark. Small, almost dismissible. But I'd been around enough flames to know what embers could become. Around us, the noise of maison had softened. Other tables murmured in low conversation, silverware tapping gently, laughter blooming now and then like quiet jazz. But our table, the table, grew louder, not in sound, but in judgment. Tyler stabbed at his duck with the edge of his fork, mangling the slice like he expected it to fight back. He chewed theatrically, then leaned back with a slight grimace. I like my duck cooked, he said flatly. This is raw. Lenora didn't even look up. It's always the same with these trendy places. Presentation over substance. Jessica passed behind her silently, her expression unreadable. Clarice nudged the duck with the side of her knife, like it had offended her personally. She didn't taste it. Colby? She said, casual but sharp. Honestly, can you even afford a dinner like this? The question dropped with a weight that felt both rehearsed and completely genuine. Gavin coughed. Sabrina shifted in her seat. I didn't speak, not yet. Clarice kept going, eyes on her plate. I mean, we rearranged our schedules for this. Maison is on all those hardest-to-get lists. Either you're overextending yourself or someone else is footing the bill. Tyler chuckled under his breath. No shame in asking for help, man. I glanced toward the bar, where Isaac stood behind the polished counter, drying a glass slowly. His eyes met mine, and he gave me a look that asked the same question Jessica had asked earlier. Now? I said nothing, because timing, like plating, mattered more than people realized. Jessica returned with a wine list and placed it between my father and Tyler. My father barely looked at it, gesturing for another bottle of the same Bordeaux they'd been drinking. He still hadn't commented on the food, just the wine. Gavin cleared his throat. Maybe we don't need another bottle. We're celebrating, Harlan said. It's not every day you get the family together. Let's enjoy it. Jessica reappeared with a black leather folder. The check, placed carefully at the center of the table like a shared secret. Tyler, ever the provider, reached for it, opened it, paused. There's a mistake, he said, blinking at the paper. It doesn't include the food. A hush passed through the group, not dramatic, but definite, like a breath taken too late. He looked at Jessica, who didn't flinch. You left off the meals, he said again. Jessica simply turned to me. I met Isaac's gaze. 5 years. That's how long it had been since I walked out of my parents' house with nothing but a duffel bag and a phone with 3 contacts. 5 years of burning my arms on open flames, of sleeping on a mattress with no frame, of saying yes, chef to men I would eventually surpass. I had imagined this moment more times than I could count, and now that it was here, I wasn't angry, I wasn't triumphant, I was still. Finally. I gave Isaac the slightest nod. He stepped forward. The dinner, he said smoothly, has been taken care of. Tyler frowned. By who? Isaac looked directly at him, then at the rest of the table. By the owner. For a second, no one moved. Clarice blinked. Once, twice. Her mouth opened slightly. Wait, what did you just say? The glass of cherry gastrique in front of her caught the light, still untouched. The exact recipe I'd first made for my high school girlfriend's prom dinner. Back then, my mother had called it messy syrup. Back then, no one had finished the plate. My name wasn't on the menu tonight, but my fingerprints were on every course, every pairing, every tile in this place. I looked at the spoon resting next to Clarice's plate. Clean. No one needed to say another word. The fire had already happened. The smoke was just catching up. Welcome back, Chef Marchand. Your table is ready? Isaac's voice cut through the white noise of silverware and half-laughed insults with the clarity of a violin string snapping in a quiet concert hall. Silence cracked across the table like dropped glassware. Clarice froze mid-sip, the rim of her flute resting just above her lip, as if the moment she moved again would confirm what she'd just heard. My mother's hand trembled, the soft clink of pearls brushing against her water glass as she adjusted her napkin without needing to. Gavin looked up from the check, blinking slowly. Embarrassed? Or maybe just curious? I could never tell with him. Lenora broke first. What? Do you mean chef? Not sharp, not angry, just confused. As if someone had spoken a foreign word and she wasn't sure whether to be flattered or insulted. Isaac didn't blink. He simply nodded in my direction, calm as ever. Maison is his restaurant. Chef Marchand is our founder and sole proprietor. The words hung in the air like perfume. Sharp, undeniable, impossible to ignore. Tyler leaned back slightly, shifting in his chair with a sudden weight of discomfort. But you were vague, he stammered. You said you just worked in food. I looked at him, not with malice, not with pity, just clarity. I do work in food, I said. I stood, slow and deliberate. I picked up my napkin, folded it once, then again, and laid it on the table beside my untouched duck. You wanted to know how I could afford this dinner? I looked at each of them, Clarice, Gavin, Lenora, Harlan, one at a time. Easy, I said, voice level. I wrote the menu. There it was. Nothing more. No rising pitch, no declaration, just truth. Set in front of them like every other course tonight. Unasked for, but exact. Jessica returned then, as if on cue, carrying a final glass of wine. A late harvest white, delicate and full. She placed it in front of Clarisse. Compliments of the house, she said softly, and then after a pause, and the owner you never saw. Clarisse didn't touch it. My mother said nothing. It was Harlan who finally broke the quiet. He looked at Isaac, then at me, then back to his plate. His mouth opened, but no words came. And for once, he didn't try to fill the space. He just sat there, quietly. I didn't stay for what came next. I didn't need to see the looks exchanged, the mental rewrites of their own narratives. I didn't need their apologies or their sudden performative pride. I had waited years for this moment, nights scrubbing stovetops, cutting vegetables in silence, falling asleep on a bus bench after missing the last train from a catering gig. I used to picture it, the reveal, the stunned faces, the recognition. In those versions, I always delivered some brilliant final line. Something biting, something that landed like a fist. But when the moment came, I didn't feel victorious. I felt released, like I'd been holding my breath for half a decade and finally remembered how to exhale. So I turned and walked away. No mic drop, no exit monologue, just walking out. Isaac didn't say anything as I passed. He didn't need to. As I reached the kitchen doors, the world shifted back to the rhythm I understood. Knives on cutting boards, the low hum of vents, the soft shuffle of chef's shoes over tile. Renee met me at the threshold, wiping her hands on a side towel. She handed me a folded note. "Investors are here," she said. "Mason's waiting in the back." I took the note without speaking, eyes still adjusting from the dining room light. Back to business, back to breath. Behind me, the dining room carried on, but quieter. A different kind of quiet. And somewhere in the middle of that quiet, a truth sat between them, served cold, like an apology too late. Steam hit me first. Then came the spices. The smoky cinnamon from the lamb reduction, the faint citrus from candied orange peels cooling on parchment. The familiar rhythm of knives tapping cutting boards echoed in staggered sync like a percussion ensemble finding its groove again. Home. I slipped through the swinging doors and left the weight of linen and legacy behind. In here, nobody raised a glass to say my name. But everyone knew it. Renee stood at the pass, plating the dessert course with her usual quiet focus. Zoe beside her, brows furrowed as she arranged bruleed pears with tweezers like they might explode if she touched them wrong. I watched her elbow wobble slightly, rookie nerves. But her instincts were clean, steady. Neither of them said anything right away. That was part of what I loved about this team. Respect wasn't noisy here. My apron still hung by the office door, neatly folded the way I left it this morning. The hooks beside it held no titles, just purpose. "You okay?" Renee finally asked, still focused on the plate. "Yeah," I said. "Turns out silence is seasoning too." She gave me half a smirk, the kind that knew better than to ask for the full story. Behind me, footsteps approached. I didn't need to turn around to know who it was. Mason's voice followed. "They're waiting in the back." I nodded. They tasted the duck? They were stunned. One of them cried, but swore it was the gastrique. He handed me the leather folder. "You ready?" "As I'll ever be." We walked past the dry storage, past the cooler with a tray of lavender ice cubes we'd been testing for summer cocktails. Every tile under my feet, every groove in the countertop, every detail in that space had been a decision I made. And in that moment, it felt like walking through a map of myself. The conference room wasn't fancy, just a long table, 4 chairs, and a projector with a fan that hummed too loud. But the air in there was honest. That mattered more. The investors, 3 of them, well-dressed but not stiff, looked up as I entered. Mason made the introductions again, though they already knew who I was now. I opened the folder and began, not with slides or stats, but with one sentence. "We're not just scaling food, we're replicating dignity." That was it, the heart of it, the reason Maison mattered more than just margin. We weren't franchising flavors. We were franchising belonging in a world that too often told people like me to stay in the background. I walked them through the Charleston layout, the staffing plan, the mentorship model. Showed them photos from training sessions, not just dishes. Zoe's hands holding a paring knife correctly for the first time. Renee teaching plating symmetry with a spool of string. When I finished, no one clapped. They just nodded, the quiet kind of approval that means something's already settled. The youngest one reached for the pen first. The others followed. Charleston was happening. Maison wasn't just a secret anymore. It was legacy now. As the investors stood to leave, Mason clapped my shoulder. "Told you they'd get it," he said. I nodded. "Thanks for staying in the fire with me." He smiled. "Man, we are the fire." I packed up the folder, tucking the blueprint pages back inside. The last one bore a handwritten note from Mason, scrawled in blue ink. "We're not building a restaurant, we're building proof." I didn't say anything. Didn't need to. We both knew what that meant. I stepped out of the conference room into the hallway, the noise of the kitchen humming steady on the other side of the wall. Just before reaching the prep line, my phone buzzed in my pocket. "Clarice, can we talk? Just us." I stared at the screen a long moment. Not anger, not surprise, just the awareness that the ripple had reached its next shore. Outside, I could hear Zoe laughing softly. Probably dropped something again. I tucked the phone away. The fire was still burning. But now, I was the one tending it. Clarice was waiting by the staff bar. No jewelry this time, no heels, no watch that needed announcing. Just her in a gray cardigan I didn't recognize, and a glass of still water half full and untouched. It was the first time in years I'd seen her without her armor. No sparkle, no edge, just silence. We sat in the back of the restaurant, behind the kitchen, on 2 wooden milk crates we hadn't replaced since the first year. The old walk-in fridge had long been converted into a compact wine cellar, but the space still held the smell of citrus peels and cold metal. It was where we used to sneak desserts as kids. I remembered stealing lemon tarts with her at 10 years old. We thought if we stayed quiet, no one would notice. But of course they did. Clarice got a soft warning. I got 3 days without television. "How long have you owned this place?" she asked, eyes scanning the ceiling like she wasn't ready to meet mine. "Since before Gavin's second promotion," I said. She let out a quiet breath that might have been a laugh. God. I waited. I'd learned a long time ago that silence was a better invitation than pressure. She finally looked over. "I didn't mean to humiliate you." "You didn't," I said. "I stopped giving you that power a long time ago." She nodded slowly. "Still, I've been cruel and loud. Maybe because I needed you quiet." There it was, the honesty. A little clumsy, a little late, but real. Clarice wasn't a villain. She was just good at taking up space, and I'd spent most of my life trying to disappear into what was left. "When you left home," she said, "Mom said you'd burn out in 6 months. I told her you'd last a year. And you lasted long enough to own the place we made fun of in that food blog 5 years ago." I raised an eyebrow. "Yeah," she admitted, "that was me." I laughed just once. I figured. She pulled an envelope from her bag and held it out. I didn't take it right away. "This is a contract," she said. "For my bridal shower, I want it here, at Maison, if you'll have me." I took the envelope. "This isn't a favor," she added quickly. "And it's not because I feel guilty. It's because it's the only place that's ever shut me up. And that's rare." I looked at the contract. It was professional, polished. No handwritten notes, no special conditions, just a blank section for menu design. "I'll do it," I said, "but on one condition." She tilted her head. "No substitutions," I said. Clarice smiled, not the way she usually did, practiced and photogenic, but soft. "Deal." We sat there for a few more moments, not as siblings, not as opponents, just 2 people trying. On the wooden crate between us, the initials C+C- 1999 had been scratched faintly into the surface. I didn't remember doing it. Maybe she had. Maybe it didn't matter. We used to be a team. Maybe we still could be. I stood up to leave first, needing to check on the line before closing. She didn't follow, but I felt her eyes on me as I stepped toward the hallway. And that's when I saw her, Lenora, our mother, standing in the reflection of the hallway mirror. Still, watching. Expression unreadable, hands clasped, like she wasn't sure whether to come closer or walk away. I didn't stop. I didn't invite. Not yet. Lenora approached the hallway slowly, like the marble floors might betray her stride if she moved too fast. Her steps were deliberate, but hesitant, as if even she didn't fully believe she was supposed to be walking this far into my world. She wore the same ivory scarf she used to wrap around my neck when I was a kid. Those rushed winter mornings where she'd tighten the knot just a little too much before pushing me out the door. Back then, I thought it was affection. Now, it looked more like armor. We stood across from each other at the far end of the service corridor, the dining room murmuring behind her, the kitchen warmth radiating behind me. Between us, tile, time, and 35 years of misunderstood love. She looked smaller without the chandelier light, or maybe I just looked taller here. I was wondering how long it would take, I said softly. She blinked, lips parting like she hadn't expected to hear my voice so plainly. I didn't want to make a scene. You didn't. That was Tyler. Her smile was brief. But it broke quickly. "Why didn't you tell us?" she asked, tone clipped like she was still trying to keep the conversation within safe lanes. I raised an eyebrow. "You told me chefs are hired, not born." "That's not what I meant." "But you did," I said, voice even, and it shaped me. She flinched, not visibly, but somewhere in the neck. That subtle tightening people do when their name gets called during a roll call they thought they'd skipped. "I didn't mean to push you away," she said. I was scared you wouldn't make it." I exhaled slowly. "So you burned the bridge before I could fall from it." She looked down. "That night I left," I continued. "You didn't ask where I was going. You just asked who would pay the rent once I was gone." I didn't know how to be proud of something I didn't understand. "I wasn't asking for pride," I said. "Just room." She looked up again, and then, without a word, she reached forward. Her fingers brushed the cuff of my chef's jacket, just barely. A ghost of a touch. Then stopped, midair. "I don't recognize you," she whispered. "But I'd like to." That was it. No tears, no elaborate confessions, just that. And strangely, it was enough. It was the most honest thing she'd said to me in 20 years. She wasn't here to rewrite anything. And that, finally, made her real. I didn't move. I didn't take her hand. I didn't offer forgiveness. Because this wasn't a moment for that. It wasn't about healing her guilt. It was about making space for both of us to stop pretending. So I nodded. Not an invitation, not a dismissal, just acknowledgement. The kind I used to beg for with every honor roll paper slipped under her door. No embrace, no absolution. Just space. The kind I never had as a boy. And now I was learning how to make it for myself. We stood there in the silence long enough for the hallway light to shift. She stepped back a half inch, enough for the cool air from the dining room to settle between us again. Isaac leaned around the kitchen doorway, a towel still draped over his shoulder. "Investors want a tour," he said. "You coming?" I nodded, my eyes still on Lenora. "I'll be there." As she turned to go, her heel caught slightly on something near her foot. She looked down, didn't bother to pick it up. After she disappeared into the shadows of the dining room, I stepped forward and crouched. A linen napkin, folded but dropped, stained faintly in the corner with cherry gastrique, my cherry gastrique, and a single thumbprint. Her thumbprint. Maybe she had tasted the duck after all. I folded the napkin gently, placed it on the service tray nearby, and headed toward the kitchen. Behind me, the hallway was empty again. But somehow, it didn't feel quite as cold. Mason slid the folder across the table. The contracts inside were still warm from the last signature, the ink not yet set. "Charleston's greenlit," he said, leaning back, arms crossed, proud in that quiet way he always was when something mattered. "You're not just a chef anymore, man. You're a movement." I didn't answer right away. I just ran a finger along the edge of the folder, then glanced at the whiteboard behind him. It was crowded with notes. Staffing estimates, layout sketches, a calendar already marked with color-coded deadlines. Tacked below all of it, at eye level, was something less precise. My original recipe journal. Oil-stained, frayed at the corners, still held together with a rubber band that had lost its stretch. That book had lived through couches, counters, bus stations. A few of the pages still smelled, faintly like cinnamon and desperation. I used to write in it at 2 a.m. when I had no kitchen of my own. Just a hot plate and a dream I didn't know how to name yet. "Want to run the numbers again?" Mason asked. I shook my head. Number were ready. Renee poked her head in through the half-open office door. I can start booking tasting menus for the launch if you want. Press folks, influencers, I smiled. Let's feed the ones who fed us first. Line cooks, dishwashers, night shift moms. Press can wait. She nodded, satisfied, and disappeared back toward the kitchen. Mason leaned forward. They asked if your family's involved in this round. My jaw twitched slightly. They dined here without knowing I built it. That's all the involvement I need. He didn't push. That's what made him good at this. Not just the paperwork, but the space he gave people when they needed to say nothing at all. I looked down at the folder again. The Charleston expansion wasn't just growth. It was proof that the foundation I'd laid with scarred hands and borrowed spoons was real. That what we were building had gravity, permanence. I'd always known food could fill more than stomachs. Now it was filling spaces, making room. A knock at the office door broke the quiet. Zoe peeked in. Her voice was soft. Chef, your brother's outside. Gavin. He says he just wants to talk. I turned in my chair slowly. Not shocked, but not ready either. I hadn't seen Gavin alone in years. Usually he was flanked by Clarice's commentary or Harlan's expectations. He was the quiet middle. Never the aggressor. Never the buffer. Just present. Consistently. Passively present. But now, he looked like a man not sent, but self-sent. I glanced at Mason. Give me a minute, he nodded. This is your space. I'm just here to remind you it's real. I closed the laptop, stood, walked to the door. Zoe stepped aside as Gavin came in. He was holding something in his right hand, creased and folded. I couldn't see it clearly. Hey, he said. Hey. He looked around the office, took it in, the whiteboard, the folders, the chaos that somehow made sense only to me. This is you, he said finally. I didn't answer, just waited. I'm sorry, he said, for all of it, for not standing up, for watching you get brushed off and never saying anything. Still, I waited. And I want to help, he added, if you'll let me. He held out what was in his hand. It was a photograph, creased, sun-faded, United States, maybe 9 and 11, backyard grass to our knees, holding wooden spoons like swords, laughing too hard for the camera to catch focus. I'd forgotten it existed. I found it last week, he said. Mom was cleaning out the guest room. Said you'd probably thrown it away. I took it slowly, my fingers brushing his just long enough to feel how unsure he was. I never threw anything away, I said. We stood there for a long beat, the kind of silence that didn't sting. It just held space. I didn't open the door wider, but I didn't close it either. Let's talk, I said quietly. At the kitchen table, the real one. He nodded, and for the first time, he didn't look like someone trying to prove anything. Just a brother, with a spoon and a photo, hoping to build something too. We didn't say much on the way to French Broad Bridge. Gavin kept his hands in his coat pockets. I kept mine loose at my sides, letting them brush against the late summer air like they were still remembering how to not ball into fists. We walked side by side, our shoes falling out of rhythm more often than not. He used to race me here when we were 8, barefoot and wild. He always let me win. Or maybe I just never noticed him slowing down. The river below reflected the rust gold sky, softening the sharp edges of the buildings along the bank. Our shadows stretched ahead of us, long and thin, like we were trying to outrun the younger versions of ourselves. When we reached the center of the bridge, Gavin stopped first. Elbows on the railing, eyes down at the water. I followed, leaning beside him. "It's quieter out here than I remembered," he said. I nodded. He took a breath. "I didn't fight for you back then." The words came without drama, without defense, just plain. "I was scared they'd cut me off too," he continued. "So I stayed quiet, played along." I didn't interrupt. I didn't let him off the hook either. "You didn't owe me anything," I said. "But it would have been nice." He turned slightly, just enough that I could see the lines near his eyes. Not from age, from trying to keep peace in a house that demanded silence more than truth. "I used to think Clarice was the golden one," he said. "But honestly, I think it was you. You left. That didn't feel like winning." "It was," he said. "I just didn't know it then." We stood there a while, watching the light disappear slowly into the hills. He shifted again. "Lily wants to learn to cook." I looked over. "She's 10, right?" 11 next month," he said. "Already better with a knife than I ever was." I smiled. That's a low bar. He laughed, the kind that came from somewhere deeper than amusement. "I want her to have a world," he said, "where she doesn't think success only comes with a degree framed in mahogany or applause from people who never showed up." I nodded, but didn't answer. Not yet. Then he reached into his coat and pulled out a sealed envelope, handed it to me. "This is my financial proposal," he said. "For Charleston, full transparency, every cent accounted for. No family strings." I didn't open it. I just held it. For a second, the only sound was water moving beneath us. He didn't ask for forgiveness. He offered something more honest, partnership. And for the first time in our lives, we were eye level, not in height, but in truth. "Let's talk again," I said. "At the kitchen table, the real one." He nodded. "I'll bring coffee." "Bring Lily," I said. "She can hold the spatula." As we walked back toward the city, the lights of downtown Asheville blinked on slowly, like the town was exhaling after holding its breath all day. We didn't talk much on the walk back either. But this time, it didn't feel like silence. It felt like room. When I stepped back through the side door at Maison, the kitchen was mid-shutdown. Renee wiping down the steel, Jessica re-racking wine glasses. Everything had that final rhythm of a place winding down, but still breathing. Renee met me at the office door with a folded note. "She came by," she said softly. "Left this for you." I looked down. Lavender gray envelope, my mother's stationery, neat handwriting across the front, just my name. No chef, no titles, just Colby. Inside, a single sheet of paper, handwritten, ink slightly blotted at the top, like her hand had hesitated. Signed at the bottom, "Love, Mom." I didn't open it. Not yet. Some things deserved quiet first. The paper trembled slightly in my hands. Not because I was nervous, but because I didn't know what to expect anymore. That's what change does. It makes room for doubt, for air where there used to be concrete. It was just past midnight in my apartment above Maison. The rain tapped lightly against the skylight, not enough to distract, but enough to remind me the world was still moving while I sat still. The city below had quieted to its late-hour rhythm. Streetlights blinking on empty sidewalks, distant car tires brushing puddles, the faint buzz of neon from the corner deli. Asheville didn't shout after midnight. It whispered. On the table, a single lemon, my recipe journal, and a candle burning low in a reused creme brulee ramekin. It had once been part of a test batch for Zoe's final. Now it just held wax, the scent of vanilla still clinging faintly to the ceramic. I unfolded the lavender-gray envelope slowly. Her handwriting was neat, even after all these years. Elegant but controlled, like she was still afraid to let a word fall out of line. "Colby," it began. "No dear, no son, just my name. I once told someone you were trying something in the food world. I said it like an apology. I regret that." I leaned back in the chair, letting the line sit for a moment. It didn't hit like a dagger. It wasn't meant to. It felt more like someone finally naming the bruise they'd kept pretending wasn't there. "I don't know how to be proud of you the way you needed, but I'm trying to learn." That sentence hung heavier, not because it was dramatic, but because it was honest. Lenora had never been one to admit not knowing. Her power had always been in certainty. Even when she was wrong, she was right. Just quietly, insistently right. But here on this page, she didn't claim certainty, just effort. For her, that was seismic. "Can we share a meal? Just us. No expectations. No announcements." I stared at the next line longer than the rest. "You built something beautiful. I didn't see it until I tasted it." I closed my eyes. The duck, the cherry gastrique, the sauce she hadn't commented on, but hadn't sent back either. It wasn't everything, but it was something. And that something no longer held power over me. It didn't grant me worth, didn't validate my path. It simply existed, like a postcard from a place you used to call home. Not asking you to return, but acknowledging you'd been there. I folded the letter gently, smoothing the crease like it might bruise again if I pressed too hard. Then I picked up my phone and typed a message. "Let's meet. Not at Maison. Somewhere simpler. Somewhere real." I didn't wait for her reply. I didn't need one right away. The candle gave one last flicker and went out. I let the darkness sit for a moment before reaching for my old recipe journal. Page 3 was loose from years of flipping past it too fast. I pulled it free. "Lemon mousse. Maybe she'll like it one day." Underlined in blue ink. My handwriting, still uneven, too large for the lines. I smiled without meaning to. The next morning, I called Alma's kitchen. "Table for 2. Sunday, noon." The bell above the door jingled, sharp and familiar, like a memory returning before you're ready to receive it. I looked up from the menu board. She stood there. No makeup, no pearl set. Just my mother, Lenora. She wore a navy sweater that made her look smaller than I remembered. Not fragile, just real. The kind of real you rarely get to see when someone spends a lifetime perfecting appearances. Alma's wasn't the kind of place that required dressing up. It was all tile floor, mismatched chairs, and a chalkboard menu that hadn't changed in 3 years. The scent of cinnamon and bacon grease lingered no matter the hour. The waitresses called everyone hon, and the coffee never stopped pouring. It was the kind of place that served truth with toast. She stepped in slowly, like she wasn't sure she had the right to be here. I raised a hand, motioned to table 6 by the window. Sunlight filtered through dusty blinds, catching the rim of her glasses as she sat down across from me. "They have the best shakshuka in the county," I said, folding my hands around my mug. "You okay with spice?" She glanced at the menu, then back at me. I used to be afraid of flavor. I arched an eyebrow. She shrugged. "Turns out bland isn't safe. It's just quiet." I smiled, just a little. "There's a difference? Now I know there is." We didn't say much after that. The waitress came by cheerful and quick. She brought us coffee, poured without asking. I ordered the shakshuka. She ordered the same. We ate slowly, the tomato and chili heat built gradually, the eggs perfectly poached beneath the surface. She winced once at the spice, then adjusted, took another bite. It was the first meal we'd shared, just the two of us, in nearly a decade. No tablecloth, no assigned seats, no speeches, just food, and air between us. She buttered a piece of sourdough, paused, then looked up. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for not making this about me." That was it. That was her apology. Not groveling, not revision, just acknowledgement. And I didn't need more. I didn't need her to say sorry for calling your dreams unserious, or sorry for not seeing you when you were right in front of me. I just needed to feel like her child, not her mistake. I nodded, letting the silence settle again. For the first time in my life, that silence didn't feel punitive. It felt like space. We finished our food. She paid in compliments, small but sincere. "Do you still write recipes in that little journal?" she asked before we stood. "Sometimes." She smiled. "I think I'd like to read one someday." Outside, the clouds were breaking, sun slicing between buildings. She gathered her coat, standing slowly, and before turning to go, reached into her bag. "I almost forgot," she said, handing me a folded envelope. "From Clarice, the venue contract. She said to ask about the lemon mousse." I took it without reading it. She stepped back, then stopped. "I'd like to try again." "Try what?" I asked. "Whatever we lost," she said. "Maybe not all at once, but maybe coffee sometimes. No calendars, just when it feels right." I nodded. She walked out, the bell chiming again. This time it didn't sound like a warning. It sounded like release. The receipt arrived tucked under my mug. I flipped it over. Table 6, paid in full by Chef Marchand. I pulled out a pen from my coat pocket and wrote beneath it, "No revisions." And I meant it. The bridal shower was set. Clarice had picked the date, sent the invites, even had a photographer scheduled. One of those quiet, moody types who claimed natural light was his only filter. She texted me the guest count, asked about wine pairings, and then, "Can you do a tasting menu?" I had one condition. "No substitutions," I said. "And don't ask what's being served." There was a beat before her reply came through. "Deal." The private room at Maison wasn't large. It wasn't meant to impress with grandeur, but to hold people close. We designed it that way. Warm, amber lighting, oak floors, linen chairs with imperfect seams. Clarice sat with 8 women I didn't know, some in silk, others in jeans. They laughed easily, like women who'd chosen each other. This time, her smile looked real, not rehearsed. The food came out in slow waves, a chilled pea soup in ceramic bowls shaped like river stones, pan-roasted halibut with grapefruit segments, duck confit on pickled watermelon rind. Each course said something without speaking. I watched from the side of the pass, arms crossed. Renee ran the plating with quiet confidence. Zoe moved beside her now, like she belonged there. Clarice raised her fork during the 3rd course. Duck again, but done my way this time. Skin crisp like paper, meat tender and resting over a fig just that had taken 3 days to perfect. She chewed slowly, then looked up at me across the room. "Your duck," she called out, "is better than Tyler's attitude." A few of her friends laughed. I smirked. "The duck doesn't talk back." She tilted her head, still smiling, but her eyes softened. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for this, and for not rubbing anything in." I gave her a small nod. She had expected revenge, or at least a quiet flex. But this wasn't about payback. It wasn't even about balance. This was about agency, mine. Midway through dessert, honey cake with lemon cream and shards of thyme candy. She stood for a toast. Clarice rarely gave up control of a room without purpose. She held her glass steady. "To my brother," she said, voice clear but not performative, "who fed my soul long before he fed my table." There was a pause after that. No applause, just silence that said something had shifted, something real. I didn't need the applause. I didn't need the compliment. But I let it wash over me like light rain, not as validation, but as weather. It came, it passed, and I stayed. After the plates were cleared, Clarice lingered behind. The others had moved to the lounge, sipping digestives and comparing stories about bachelorette trips gone wrong. She approached slowly, holding her shoes in one hand like a teenager at a wedding reception. "Would you consider," she asked, "doing the cake?" I blinked. "The wedding cake?" She nodded. I wanted to taste like who I really am, not who I pretend to be. I smiled. "That's a tall order. You up for it? I've baked harder things." She grinned, then turned to go. Before she did, Zoe slipped something into her hand, a folded piece of parchment paper, her handwriting neat and curved. "Chef says it's only shared with people who finally taste for themselves," Zoe said. Clarice looked at the note, then at me. "Lemon mousse?" I shrugged. "Try it again sometime. You might surprise yourself." As the lights dimmed and the kitchen reset for evening service, I walked her to the door. It felt like a goodbye, but not a final one. Just a pause before the next chapter. Outside, Harlan stood on the sidewalk, hands in his pockets. He didn't look out of place, but he didn't look comfortable either. He nodded once, like men do when they're reaching for something without putting it into words. "Come by the house this weekend," he said. "There's something in the garden I think you'll want to see." I didn't answer right away. I just watched his breath fog in the cooling evening air. And thought, maybe. I stood at the edge of the Marchand garden for the first time in over a decade. The tomato bed was back. The last time I'd been here, the ground was covered in gravel and rose mulch, pruned so precisely it looked more like a showroom than a backyard. Back then, my mother said vegetable beds made the house look unkempt. My father never contradicted her. He just pulled up the plants I'd started one evening after school and said, "It's not the right time of year." But now, the gravel was gone. The roses, too. In their place, rough soil, uneven edges, and 2 rows of wooden stakes spaced just wide enough for vines to climb. And at the end of the first row, a single tomato plant stood about knee height. Not heirloom, not fancy. Just a common, bright green-leafed vine with dirt clinging to the stem like it belonged there. Harlan was already outside, waiting. He wore an old flannel shirt and scuffed boots that looked borrowed from someone who actually worked the ground. His hands were bare, but they didn't look soft anymore. "I dug it up last week," he said, nodding toward the space beside the tomato plant. "Thought the soil was ruined?" I stepped forward, letting my shoes sink just slightly into the earth. "It never was," I said. "Just needed to be turned." He nodded again. There was something in his eyes, tired maybe, or open in a way I hadn't seen since I was small enough to think he hung the moon. "I used to think pride had to be expressed a certain way," he said. "Trophies, titles, applause, control," I said. He exhaled, sharp through his nose. "I didn't know how to be proud of you without control." I knelt by the edge of the plot, let my fingers press into the soil. Warm, slightly damp, alive. "You still don't have to be proud," I said. "Just honest." He was quiet a moment, then reached behind him and held out a trowel, not ceremoniously, not as an offering, just as a tool. No speech, no lesson, just an action. I took it, and together, we dug. Side by side, we cleared space for another row. He didn't ask if I wanted to plant something specific. I didn't offer a suggestion. The silence between us did the speaking, familiar and newly respectful. We moved in sync without instruction. I pressed my palm into the dirt to flatten it. He followed with a small hole, dropping in a starter vine from a tray I hadn't seen him carry out. There was no apology, no rewritten history. But he was bending. And sometimes, that was the closest we'd ever get. I don't know how long we worked, long enough for the clouds to shift and for a breeze to carry the scent of cut grass over the fence line. Long enough for my knees to feel the ache of time and for my mind to finally quiet. When we finished the row, he brushed his hands on his jeans, then looked at the stake on the first tomato plant. Tied to it was a ribbon. Faded, frayed. The same dull blue I used to wrap around my first apron string when I was 13 and still believed I needed symbols to feel like a cook. He didn't mention it. Neither did I. We stood in silence, looking at what we'd done. No grand design, just one honest afternoon. Before I turned to leave, he spoke, voice low but clear. "I'd like to bring your mother next time," he said. "No expectations. Just brunch." I nodded. That was enough. Zoe nearly burned the trout. The pan was too hot, and she knew it the second the skin buckled. Her wrist flinched, a half second too slow on the turn. I saw it coming before it happened. But I didn't yell. I didn't step in. Instead, I leaned in beside her as she stared down at the fillet. "What did you learn?" She didn't look at me, just adjusted the flame and whispered, "That pan heat lies, but instinct doesn't." I smiled. "Then trust your instincts next time." She nodded, and that was that. Maison's mentorship program had just finished its first full season. 8 students, different backgrounds, different paths. 4 had already accepted full-time offers in kitchens across Asheville. Zoe stayed, not because she had nowhere else to go, but because she finally believed she belonged here. And she wasn't just staying. She was becoming. Renee watched the interaction from the other side of the kitchen, arms crossed, expression unreadable in that way only experienced chefs can pull off. When Zoe moved to plate the rest of the trout, Renee leaned over. "She's ready," she said quietly. "Time to sharpen a new blade." I said nothing, but I knew she was right. Later that afternoon, I called Zoe over to the pass and handed her a narrow box wrapped in parchment. "What's this?" she asked. "Open it." She peeled the paper back carefully, more nervous than I'd seen her in months. Inside, nestled in a velvet-lined case, was a new chef's knife. Same design as mine, same balance, same weight. But engraved on the blade was her name, not her initials, not a nickname. Zoe Campbell. She stared at it for a long time, not speaking. "There's a note inside the box," I said. "Read it later." She nodded, but her hand hovered over the blade, like it was something sacred. "It's not a gift," I added. "It's a mirror." That was the moment. Not applause, not a promotion, just a quiet transition of belief from mine to hers. Legacy isn't about inheritance. It's about what survives when your story doesn't need repeating anymore. I'd spent years trying to convince people that I mattered, that I was good enough, that I belonged. And somewhere along the way, I stopped needing to say it out loud. Now, it was Zoe's turn to write a story of her own, not mine. Heron that evening, she prepped the next service solo. I stayed at the pass window, arms folded, watching. Not once did I step in, She corrected plating errors, called back an overdone scallop, tasted every sauce twice. Her hands moved with intention. Her voice didn't shake. She wasn't perfect. She was prepared. After service, the team gathered for our usual end-of-night breakdown. Renee tossed Zoe a kitchen towel and nodded. "Well, chef," she said, "how'd we do?" Zoe smiled, breathless but proud. "We fed them. We didn't flinch." "I'll take that." Renee raised her bottle of sparkling water. "To feeding and not flinching." We all joined in. Later, after the kitchen had gone quiet and the last tray had been washed, I returned to my office to check emails. One new message from Mason. Subject: cover mock-up. Final. I clicked it open. Attached was the image the publisher had chosen. Me, standing alone in the kitchen, apron on, one hand on a sauté pan, the other on the counter, not posing, just moving, just working, a candid shot taken during prep last fall. Light falling on the line like it was daylight coming through a memory. I stared at it longer than I expected. It didn't feel like performance. It felt like truth. This was the story I never thought would be told. And now, it wouldn't be mine alone anymore. I closed the email and returned to the box Zoe had opened earlier. Inside, where the knife had been, was a small folded card. I'd written it months ago when she first stayed late without being asked. In black ink, 6 words. "This isn't a gift. It's a mirror." She hadn't said anything about the note yet. But I knew she'd read it, and I knew she'd understand. We met at Alma's, all of us. No place cards, no speeches. No pre-assigned seats or floral arrangements meant to impress strangers. Just a table and people willing to sit again. The Marchand family, as imperfect as the silverware in that cafe, trickled in one by one. Clarice arrived first, early for once, hair pulled back, wearing sneakers she wouldn't have been caught dead in a year ago. Gavin followed, with Lily in tow. Her braid half undone, her eyes scanning the pastry case like she was reading scripture. Then Harlan, in a windbreaker that still had a sail tag tucked beneath the seam. Lenora came last, holding a paper bag that looked suspiciously like it contained a fresh loaf of sourdough she probably didn't bake. The table was long and a little crooked. Chairs didn't match. One creaked every time someone shifted weight. But it was real. More real than anything we'd ever shared under our childhood roof. Brunch came slowly, the way it should. Eggs, soft and buttery. Biscuits crumbling at the corners. Cinnamon rolls sticky enough to require finger licking. No one told anyone to sit up straight. No one asked where the cloth napkins were. We just ate. Together. "Look at you," Lenora said softly at one point, watching me refill Lily's orange juice. "You're sitting at the head of the table, son." I looked down the length of chipped wood and uneven placemats. "We're all on the same side today," I said. She smiled, and this time it didn't carry apology or performance. It just was. Gavin passed the salt and cleared his throat. "Lily wants to work Saturdays at Maison. Think we could set that up?" Lily's eyes widened. "I can peel carrots really fast, and I already know not to cry when the onions come out." I nodded. "We'll see how you handle the prep sink first." Clarice chewed a bite of quiche thoughtfully and pointed her fork at me. "The mousse is still bitter," she said. I waited for the punchline. She smiled. "And still perfect." I said nothing. Just let the warmth settle in behind my ribs. Renee arrived toward the end with a surprise I hadn't asked for, a small white plate, delicate and clean, holding a single portion of lemon mousse, topped with a lavender sprig. No explanation, just memory turned tangible. She placed it at the center of the table. No one flinched. Everyone finished. And I didn't need them to say it. But I saw it in the way their shoulders dropped, the way no one reached for a phone. We were here, for once. Present. Hungry, not just for food, but for this. Whatever this was. We planned brunches after that. No holidays, no rules, just rhythms. One plate, one story at a time. Not rebuilding what we'd lost, but building something new from what was left. As they stood to leave, one by one, peeling off into the afternoon sun, I reached into my bag and pulled out the padded envelope I'd sealed that morning. Inside, my final manuscript. Title: Salt, Fire, Silence. Before I dropped it into the mailbox just outside Alma's, I opened the cover one last time. On the dedication page, for those told they didn't belong until they created the place themselves. I smiled. Then I closed it and let it go.